Just one topic. Is higher interest rates just bullish for oil and gas because it makes all the renewables investments in solar and wind impossible to build for profits because it's hard to even break even with zero interest rates? Or is it much more complicated story as well with interest rates involved?
Interest rate hit everyone, but the oil industry, because they make very large profits, they can afford it. Renewables basically have very low margin, and that margin is coming from subsidies. So they got hit really hard. However, I would like to mention a piece of information for those who are not knowledgeable of the oil and gas market. There is no substitution between renewables and oil. In Europe, North America, Japan, South Korea, India, and China, that's more than 80% of the global demand. There is no substitution, which means that if those countries double or triple, and I'm going to talk about generation, and I'm going to talk about capacity. If they double or triple their generation from solar and wind, that will have no impact on oil demand. Why? Because oil is rarely used in power generation. The impact will come from electric vehicles, not from renewables. And when it comes to renewables, they are, of course, they are going to affect coal and gas, but we got to be very careful here, because the impact on coal and gas is going to be in countries where the population is declining and economic growth is very low. But if you look at the majority of the world, and you talk about India and China and others, the growth in energy demand is very high and higher than the growth in renewables. That means you need to fill the gap, aside from the interruptions or the intermittent electricity coming from solar and wind. Aside from that, you need to fill the gap. And it just happened that, given that LNG is expensive, that gap is going to be filled by coal. And therefore, the idea that the IEA and others are talking about that coal demand will peak in 2024 is questionable, because those countries' demand for energy is increasing and coal remains the cheapest source.
Yeah, and then you can add another layer that we probably need to redesign the grid at some point to fit all that renewable if we're going to increase. And that's also a very complicated task, it seems.
This is absolutely a big problem. Probably this need a whole session on its own, because this is where the criticism to states like Arizona and California is happening right now, that, okay, you go for all your plans, but your grid is not ready. And for some European countries, especially in Eastern Europe, or the interconnection between Eastern Europe and Western Europe, you are talking about grids that are 70 years old. So there is a big problem.